The hall was filled with laughter and golden light, but her voice sliced through it like a blade when she leaned close to my son and said loud enough for me to hear, "That poor old man must be so embarrassed standing here in borrowed clothes." I felt every eye shift toward me, as if the words had stripped me bare, and in that moment I tightened my grip on the secret I had carried for years, a secret worth $53 million. Before we continue, please subscribe our channel and tell us in the comments what time it is. I had kept that inheritance hidden, buried so deep that even my son believed I lived a quiet, modest life. I had watched him grow strong, watched him chase dreams, and never once hinted at the fortune waiting beneath my silence. I never cared for riches or flaunting what I had. I cared for family, for loyalty, for respect. But that night her words dragged shame across my name, as though my worth could be measured by the shine of a cufflink or the cut of a suit. I studied her face as she laughed with her friends, her eyes flicking at me like I was less than the dust beneath her heels. My son smiled blindly beside her, so proud, so unaware. I felt a slow storm gather inside me, a storm that had waited patiently for its moment. As the ceremony faded into the reception, I watched her parade across the floor, her dress shimmering, her laughter sharp as broken glass. She walked past me without a glance, as if I were invisible, a shadow in the corner of her perfect night. Guests leaned close to whisper words too soft to hear, but I knew their meaning. The poison of her insult was spreading, and every time her hand rested on my son's arm I wondered if he knew who he had chosen, if he realized that behind her polished smile lived a cruelty sharp enough to cut bone. I thought back to the years I had raised him alone, to the mornings I left before dawn to work jobs that bent my back and left my hands raw, to the nights I went to bed hungry because food was scarce and his plate had to be full. I remembered sewing his clothes by hand, patching every tear, polishing old shoes so they would last another year. He had never seen the hunger I carried. He had never felt the weight of sacrifice on his shoulders. That was my gift to him, a life without the scars of struggle. And that gift had been made possible by the inheritance I had locked away, choosing not to touch it, choosing to live as if it didn't exist, so that I would know the measure of people without the distortion of wealth. And now, as I sat in that hall watching her paint me as a pauper, I realized that wealth had never been my burden, but my weapon. I had thought it noble to hide it, but maybe it was foolish. Maybe in protecting the secret I had let snakes slither too close. I gripped the edge of the table, steadying my breath, steadying my patience, because the night was not over, and my silence was not weakness. It was the drawing back of an arrow waiting to be loosed. Dinner was served, and as waiters moved gracefully between tables, I noticed how she lifted her chin each time they passed, how her voice rose louder with each laugh, as if the room were hers to command. She clung to my son as though she had won a prize, parading him as proof of her triumph. Yet when her eyes flicked back to me, I saw disdain, not just for me, but for everything I represented: the old man, the poor father, the ghost at her glittering feast. I picked at my food, unable to taste a thing, my mind replaying the cruelty of her whisper, how easily she had dismissed me, how quickly others had believed her. I saw the shift in glances, the way family, who once greeted me with warmth, now looked through me, as if searching for confirmation of her words. A man's worth measured in silk ties and polished shoes. What a fragile, shallow lie. But I endured. The storm inside me roared, but I endured. I watched the speeches unfold one after another, each toast filled with joy, with promises of love, with visions of a future they could not yet understand. My son's smile never wavered, and it pained me, because I knew when truth comes it cuts deepest. When you are happiest. I wanted to shield him from that pain, but he had chosen her, and choices demand consequences. Finally, the time came for the father of the groom's speech, a moment where tradition calls for pride, for blessings, for gentle words, to mark the passing of one life into another. The microphone waited, gleaming under the light, and my son turned to me, with eyes shining, full of expectation, full of love. He believed in me, he believed in her, and he believed in the night's perfection. I rose slowly, my chair scraping against the floor, with a sound that hushed the room. Every eye fixed on me, every whisper stilled. I felt the air tighten, as though the walls themselves leaned closer. She sat there smirking, confident, certain that I would stumble, certain that the poor old man would embarrass himself further. I let the silence stretch, let the weight of anticipation grow, because silence is a weapon too, and in that moment I wielded it well. When I spoke, my voice was calm, steady, born of years of quiet endurance. I spoke of family, of sacrifice, of love that endures through hunger and hardship. I told them of nights when nothing but hope fed me, of mornings When only duty kept me moving, I painted the picture of a man who had lived not for wealth, not for status, but for love. My words flowed heavy with truth, and I saw faces soften, eyes glisten, tears hover at the edge of lashes, and still she smirked, still she whispered, "Poor man." That was when the storm broke. I reached into my jacket, my fingers closing around the envelope I had carried for so long. The papers within were simple numbers on a page, but they carried the weight of revelation. $53 million, locked beneath my name, untouchable, unspoken. I had hidden them away, believing they did not matter, but now they mattered more than anything. I pulled them free, held them high, and let my voice ring sharp across the silence. "I am not the poor man you believe I am." Gasps swept the room like wind through fire. My son's smile fell, his eyes wide, her face shattering, as if glass had cracked across it. The papers trembled in my hand, but my voice did not. "I have lived quietly," I said, "but never without. I have hidden wealth, not because I feared judgment, but because I wished to see who would love me without it." The hall was frozen after my words hung in the air, the echo of 53 million rattling through every stunned heart, and yet the silence was broken by her sharp laugh, brittle and desperate. She tried to brush it off with a flick of her hand, claiming it was a joke, a bluff meant to save face. She leaned into my son, whispered against his ear, and her smile curled like venom, but his eyes were locked on me, searching my face, searching for truth, and I gave him none of the hesitation she hoped for. I laid the documents flat on the table for all to see, crisp and undeniable. The guests stirred around us, whispers swelled again, but they had shifted. The story of the poor old father was dead, replaced by disbelief and awe. I had lived among them quietly for years, wearing modest suits, driving old cars, never once showing the fortune I guarded. Now their eyes held new weight, suspicion, curiosity, hunger. I did not care for their shifting winds. My eyes were on my son. His chest rose and fell too quickly, his hands clenched at his sides. He looked at her, his bride, the woman who had mocked me, who had planted poison in his ears, and I watched the first fracture split across his trust. She spoke faster, her words spilling like water from a cracked glass. She said wealth was meaningless, that her love was pure, that I had no right to embarrass them on this night. She painted herself as the victim, her voice high and trembling, her hands clinging to his arm. But I saw the flicker of fear in her eyes. I saw the way she measured the room, how her mind calculated the loss, the sudden shift of her own future. And my son listened, his lips parted, his brow furrowed, torn between loyalty and doubt. He had never known me to lie, but he had never imagined me wealthy either. His world was tilting, and she clung to him, urging him to lean her way. But then his eyes met mine, and I gave him not anger, not triumph, but truth. My gaze held steady, offering him a bridge to cross if he dared. He looked at the documents, then at her, and the silence between them was louder than any argument. Dinner plates clattered as waiters tried to carry on, but the air was thick with tension. No appetite could survive. The music faltered. Musicians, uncertain of whether to play through the storm. The guests began to divide, some whispering pity for me, others murmuring admiration, but most staring at her, waiting to see if the mask would slip. She straightened her shoulders, raised her chin, and spoke of love again, louder this time, like a shield. She said, "Money changes nothing." She said my son was hers. Regardless, she said I was cruel to test her on their wedding night. But her words betrayed her, for in her desperation, she revealed too much. She asked him aloud how much of it was his, how much would be theirs, what kind of life they could live with that fortune. She tried to disguise it as a joke, a nervous tease, but the question had already bared her heart. It was not love she craved, but possession, not family she cherished, but fortune. And my son heard it clear as thunder. He pulled his arm from her grasp, the gesture small, but enough to ripple through the crowd. She tried to laugh it off again, but the laughter was thin, hollow, shaking at the edges. I watched him step closer to me, watched him look at the documents again, watched the wheels turn behind his eyes. He remembered my years of labor, the quiet meals, the old car that rattled down the road. He remembered the nights when I told him stories instead of buying toys, the mornings when I showed him how to mend rather than replace. He remembered, and he realized I had not lived poor. I had lived deliberately, testing not him, but the world around us, and now that world was standing in judgment of the woman he had chosen. Her anger flared quick as fire. She accused me of cruelty, of manipulation, of trying to ruin her happiness. She said I was jealous, that I wanted to control him, that I had waited for this moment to humiliate her. But her voice cracked, and her eyes darted to the papers again, and again betraying the truth she could not contain. I stood silent, letting her words burn out like sparks in the wind, because silence once again was my sharpest weapon. Then my son spoke. His voice was low, but it carried through the hall. He asked her if she had meant what she said earlier, the cruel whisper about me being poor. He asked if she truly believed money defined a man, if she would have mocked him too had he not been her golden prize. And she faltered. She stumbled over her words, tried to twist them into jokes, into misunderstandings. But the truth was already clear. She had mocked me because she believed it. Safe because she thought I was powerless. She had revealed her heart when she believed no one was listening. And now the echo of that cruelty was her undoing. He turned from her to me, his face a storm of hurt and confusion. He asked why I had hidden the truth, why I had kept such a secret from him, and I answered simply, because wealth blinds men to the hearts around them, because only in poverty do you see who stands beside you. I told him I wanted to know if he could live without riches, if he could choose love without gold in his hands. He had never needed the inheritance to build his life, and I had never needed to flaunt it to prove mine. The guests shifted uneasily, the weight of truth heavy upon them. Some looked at her with disgust, others with pity, but none with admiration. Her mask was shattered, and the shards lay sharp around her feet. She tried to gather them, but every word cut deeper, every denial revealed more of her hunger. My son stepped back from her, his hand falling to his side, his shoulders heavy with the collapse of dreams. He saw her clearly for the first time, and clarity is a cruel light. The music had long since died. The food lay cold. The celebration turned into theater of betrayal and revelation, and in the center of it all I stood steady, holding not just the weight of my fortune, but the weight of justice. Justice for every silent sacrifice, every cruel whisper, every moment of humiliation I had endured in that hall. And beyond, my secret was no longer a burden, it was a blade, and it had struck true. But revenge is not yet complete, for a blade cuts deeper when twisted, and the twist was still to come. She clung to my son one last time, her voice trembling with false devotion, begging him not to listen, not to let me poison their love. And he looked at her with sorrow, not anger, with disappointment heavier than rage. His words fell soft, but final. You revealed yourself long before he did. Her face drained of color, her lips parted, but no sound came. The hall watched her crumble, and yet the night was not finished, for the inheritance was still mine to wield, and she had yet to feel the full weight of its power. The storm inside me had only begun to break, and when it finished, nothing would remain of the mask she wore. The hall sat heavy with silence after his words hung in the air. You revealed yourself long before he did, and I knew then that the tide had turned completely. No one could save her mask. Now no performance could mend the crack running through her carefully built facade. She tried still to gather herself, eyes darting from one guest to another, searching for sympathy, searching for anyone willing to take her side. But all she found were eyes filled with judgment, whispers too sharp for her to ignore. She turned back to my son, her hands desperate, clawing for his sleeves, begging for another chance. She promised change, she promised love, she promised that money never mattered. But each promise rang hollow, now each one pulled from a well already proven dry. Her voice quivered as she spoke, and the more she tried to plead, the clearer it became that she did not weep for love, but for the fortune slipping through her hands. I stepped forward, then my presence a shadow across her desperation. I told her that love cannot be bought, that character cannot be masked forever, that her cruelty was not revealed tonight, but long ago, when she believed herself safe from consequence. She trembled at my words, eyes wide like a cornered animal, because she understood at last that this inheritance, this secret I had carried, was not hers to claim, not hers to poison with greed. The documents still lay open upon the table, crisp edges glowing under the dimmed light. They were not just proof of wealth, but proof of choice, for in them was the power to decide the future of everyone standing in that room. I reached for them, lifted them slowly, and let the silence draw tight around us. Every breath, every shifting chair, every beating heart waited for what I would do. My son's face was pale, his bride's face stricken, the guests holding their breath in anticipation, and I spoke. I said that I had written my will years ago, long before this night, long before I knew who he would choose to stand beside him. I said it had been locked away, gathering dust, waiting for the day it would be needed. But tonight it shown me something I had not expected. Tonight revealed not only greed, but loyalty, not only cruelty, but truth. For though my son had chosen her, though he had walked this path blindly, When her mask slipped, he had not turned on me. He had listened, he had seen, and he had stepped back from her shadow. That was the test. That was what I needed to know. Her gasp cut through the room sharp as glass. She realized then that the inheritance had not slipped through her hands entirely. It had been snatched away by her own tongue, by her own cruelty. She screamed accusations. She claimed I had plotted this. She claimed I had set a trap. And in truth, she was not wrong. But it was a trap of her own making, for I had not put those words in her mouth. She had spoken them freely. She had called me poor, mocked me, dismissed me, and in that cruelty revealed her soul. No wealth could cover that stain. My son stood tall, now his back straight, his voice steady. He told her the marriage was over even before it had begun. He told her that love cannot exist without respect, and she had never respected the man who raised him. She fell to her knees, sobbing, clawing at his trousers, begging him to reconsider. But his eyes were stone cold, not from hatred, but from finality. The guests rose murmuring as they prepared to leave, unable to stomach the wreckage of what was meant to be a celebration. The musicians packed away their instruments quietly. The waiters disappeared into the shadows. The night had crumbled. I let the silence stretch again, then spoke one final time. I told the room that wealth means nothing if it poisons the soul, that inheritance means nothing if it destroys the family, that I would rather burn every dollar than let it become a weapon in the hands of greed. And then I turned to my son and handed him the documents, not with triumph, but with trust. His hands shook as he took them, his eyes glistening with tears. He whispered that he did not deserve it, that he had been blind. But I placed my hand on his shoulder and told him that blindness can heal, but cruelty never does. She wailed behind us, her sobs echoing down the hall as the last of the guests departed. Her voice was a storm of desperation, but no one turned back to comfort her. The hall emptied until only the three of us remained, and the silence between us was more powerful than any words. I told my son to leave with me, to walk away from this broken stage, to begin again with eyes unclouded. He nodded slowly, his steps heavy but sure. He looked back at her once more, but only once, and then turned away. We stepped out into the night air, cool and sharp after the suffocation of the hall. The stars spread wide above us, indifferent to our small dramas, and yet their light felt like blessing. I breathed deeply, felt the weight of years lift from my shoulders. My secret was no longer mine alone. My burden was shared, my revenge complete, and in its completion there was peace. She would live with the shame of her words long after the night ended. The whispers would follow her, the pity would chase her, the stain of greed would cling to her name. She had tried to claim a fortune, but instead she had lost everything, and I had given nothing more than silence, patience, and truth. My revenge had not been fire or fury. It had been the quiet revelation of her soul. The inheritance was not the weapon, it was the mirror, and she had destroyed herself in its reflection. As we walked away, my son asked if I could forgive him for not seeing sooner, for allowing her poison to seep between us, and I told him forgiveness is not earned in perfection, but in recognition. He had seen the truth. When it mattered most, he had stepped back from the cliff edge, and that was enough. The rest would take time, but time, we still had time, bought not by fortune, but by blood and trust and memory. The night grew quiet as we reached my car. The documents lay heavy in his hands, but I told him they were not chains, they were responsibility, and he must wield them with care. He nodded solemnly, the weight of adulthood settling into his shoulders, not just as a son, but as the future of a family. I smiled faintly, for though the night had been cruel, it had given him something far greater than wealth. It had given him clarity. And so the story ended, not with riches paraded or greed rewarded, but with truth revealed and justice served. The bride had sought to humiliate the old man only to find herself unmasked. The son had walked in blinded by love only to leave guided by truth. And I, the father, had carried a secret through years of silence only to unleash it at the perfect moment. The revenge was not mine alone. It was the justice of time, the consequence of arrogance, the collapse of a mask too thin to last. If this story made you hold your breath until the end, then join us by hitting subscribe for more powerful stories that will leave you thinking long after the final word fades.